Hey, what's up, everybody? Today we're looking at Your Brain is a Time Machine, The Neuroscience and Physics of Time by Dean Buonomano. Dean Buonomano is a professor of psychology and neurobiology at UCLA. He's known for his theories on time, and he's also the author of the bestseller Brain Bugs: How the Brain's Flaws Shape Our Lives. I learned about this book because Carlo Rovelli praised it in his book The Order of Time. If you're like me, you instantly thought the idea of calling the brain a time machine sounds pretty interesting. The author starts out by pointing out how common temporal references are in our language. For instance, the most commonly used noun in English is the word time, and two more words in the top five are time related words. Next, we clarify that agreeing on a definition of time is not such a straightforward thing. And then we move on to this idea of calling the brain a time machine, for which he gives four reasons. He says that the brain is a machine that remembers the past in order to predict the future. The brain is a machine that tells time. The brain is a machine that creates a sense of time. And the brain is a machine that allows us to mentally travel back and forth in time. These four ideas are then examined under two separate frameworks. You have the brain's conception of time, and then you have the physics of time. For the physics side, the author gives a discussion on Einstein's relativity and how that forced us to change the way we think about time. The book goes into depth on two models for thinking about time: presentism and eternalism. Presentism is the intuitive idea that we're always flowing forward between the past and the future in a continuous moment that we call the present. And then there's eternalism, which says that the past, present, and future are illusions, which together can be thought of as like a block universe, and that time isn't something that happens, everything simply is. To put that in lower dimensional language, everything already did happen. There isn't really this linear flow, but past, present, and future are all equally existent. This opens up some pretty big questions that are addressed at the end of the book. If we're living in a deterministic universe where things don't happen, indeed the word happen doesn't even compute, but the past, present, and future all simply are, what does that mean for ideas like free will? I'll not spoil that, but it is addressed at the end of the book. But this block universe is incredibly unintuitive, yet Einstein's relativity does seem to support that. He showed that each observer has its own independent reference frame in space-time, and that your experience of the passage of time is provisional. Then on the brain side of things, the idea is that presentism is a product of consciousness, and for us, there is no single area in the brain that controls our perception of time, but it's a number of different evolved systems working together that produce different ways of perceiving time. Most notably, you have the suprachiasmatic nucleus deep inside the brain, which is calibrated by the fact that we live on a spinning ball that orbits a star. This neural structure plays a major role in your circadian rhythms. Through complex reactions, it affects things like the rising and falling of body temperature, serotonin, and adenosine. It regulates the pineal gland to excrete melatonin, governing your sleep cycles. But the brain also has ways of using neural firing patterns as another kind of timekeeper, playing a role in time related processes like our ability to keep a beat or mentally quantifying units of time. Some of the less intuitive material in this book can be pretty confusing to think about. If the presentism perspective is an illusion resulting from an evolved brain, it makes you wonder, how did life perceive time before we had such sophisticated brains? And what about life that exists now that doesn't have all the different ways of perceiving time that we do? You might ask, since humans have such sophisticated time telling software in our brains, what about our close cousins, the chimpanzees or the bonobos? While humans' advanced conception of time is one of the things that sets us apart from our animal relatives, it turns out that so far, certain types of birds have been identified as the animals with the most sophisticated timekeeping ability besides us. A study was done where birds were allowed to bury two food items, a worm and a nut, and were given the opportunity to dig it up either hours later or 5 days later. And it seems that when they were forced to wait 5 days, they never went for the worm, presumably because they understood that it would have been rotten after 5 days. This outperformed even chimpanzees as far as time comprehension goes. If you're thinking about animals that prepare for seasons later in the year, like squirrels burying food, that's chalked up to instinct, so it isn't counted as advanced time comprehension. So, as far as the author's prose, the structure and the flow of the writing, it was fine, nothing special, but there's nothing wrong with it either. This book covers a fairly wide base of different subjects that are related to time. Of course, I loved chapter 3, Day and Night, because it's about the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and I've always been really interested in sleep. One of these days, I'll bring you guys a really good review on a sleep book whenever I get around to rereading William Dement's The Promise of Sleep. Other than that, I will say that Your Brain is a Time Machine wasn't quite as interesting as I hoped it would be. As far as a book about time, I think it's probably better than Carlo Rovelli's Order of Time, but that's just a matter of preference. They're both good. You could tell this book was written by a psychologist. It has that psychologist feel with the many studies referenced coming from psychologists like the famous Walter Mischel marshmallow test and Jean Piaget's groundbreaking work with young children. I hadn't thought much about it, but the subject of time really is an expansive subject that can encompass many different disciplines. And I really like the author's approach of addressing that with this book. And I suppose the two most important ones would be neuroscience and physics. In the end, we're left with a lot of questions still in the air. This is a subject that has had scientists and philosophers arguing for a long time. Okay, that's it for this one, guys. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Time is a fascinating subject that I, for one, tend to take for granted. It's a subject which, the more thought you give it, the more intriguing it becomes. So do you guys know of any really good books on the subject of time? If you do, let me know about it. If you're interested in time, you might like Your Brain is a Time Machine by Dean Buonomano.